You get a little break.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our Eventful Living seminar this morning. My name is Liz Brandel, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Morningstar Living. So welcome to our programme. You'll see that the catalogue is just new. This is one of our first programmes in the new catalogue for the July through December series of events. So if you have not already got your copy of the catalogue, please be sure and pick one up as you're leaving today. So again, welcome to MHS Square. Today I have the great pleasure of introducing to you Tony Moore, who is the Director of Funeral Service Education Programming at Northampton Community College. Tony has been with us before, does a phenomenal job of giving us all the information that we need as we go through life and planning for beyond. So he has certainly, he's going to guide us through all of the customs, the traditions, the changes in funeral services that we see now, as opposed to the traditional funeral that we might have seen many years past. So please put your hands together for a warm welcome for Tony Moore.
Well, thank you for being here this morning, and I hope that you'll find this time together informational, but also some fun facts. You know, how can you have fun facts about death? You know. But there's some. You'll see some interesting things that are being done nowadays that you may not have thought about, and you may be like, they really do that? And so I got my distance because I like to walk around when I talk, and so we're going to be looking at what funerals used to look like and what they look like today. And so I have a slide presentation to guide us along the way. And let's see, I got to figure out which button. Oh, okay.
Here we are on the side there. There's a little.
Okay.
We're just conserving batteries.
Gotcha. There we go. So let's look at the history of funerals. How far do funerals go back, do you think? When did people start dying? Long, long time ago. Yes. You know, and so let's look at them. One thing about death, it is a cultural universal. And what a cultural universal is, that means that it is something that is done in every culture around the world. Everybody. How many of you ever known anybody to get out of this world alive? No. So, you know, every culture has to deal with death, and how they handle death and how they do their funeral, services may vary. Now, to give you an example, people always ask me where I'm from because they say I have an accent. I don't have an accent. Y'all have the accent, right? But, you know, I'll tell them that I'm from South Canada, and they're like, wow. But really I'm from Mississippi originally. Lived in Texas, lived in South Carolina, lived in Tennessee, now Pennsylvania. So that's where I grew up and spent a lot of my time. I've been at Northampton going on 10 years now. I love it up here, love the school, and I love what I do. But there's some things that I see that are done up north that are done differently than they are down south. One instance is up here. Do you know what the difference between a full couch casket and a half couch casket is? Exactly. For a full couch, the entire lid opens up and you can see the entire person. In the South and really in a majority of the country, they use the half couch half couch casket. I'll get it out in a minute. And and it's like you only see the waist up. The foot end of the casket is lowered. And, they always say that's because, do they cut their legs off? Because they have the house. What are we going to do with a bunch of legs, So no, that's not the reason. It's just the tradition of where you're from. And so everybody experiences death, and I mentioned that every culture has their traditions, and it's been around since the beginning of the time. Now, one of the things that has also been around since the beginning of time is the process of preserving the body. So they've done that through embalming. And all through the years, they've done it different ways. And so when we look at what is the purpose of funeral service, well, I'm going to tell you, it's a waste of time. Let's just get it over with. We're going out of town. We'll contact you when you get back. He or she is gone now. Let's move on with our lives. I've got a problem, and I need you to get rid of my problem. Do those sound like good reasons for a funeral? No. But today in our society, these are the things that our society is turning to. They don't value the importance of a funeral. And we'll talk about that importance here a little bit later on. But these things are here. These things are actually statements that we as funeral directors get. And because I know if someone died in our family, it didn't matter what we had planned. Everything stopped, and you had the funeral. And but my boss told me a long time ago, we're going to start seeing I've got a problem. And the problem that I have is I have this person that has died. And I want you to get rid of my problem. Don't you think that's a bad attitude that people are experiencing now? And, and it's going to continue to get that way. And COVID did not help at all. And we'll talk about some things with COVID here in a little bit. But William Gladstone, he made a statement. And I'm going to read it to you. And I want you to think about our society today. Show me the manner in which a nation or a community cares for its death, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender sympathies of its people, their respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals. Are we seeing respect for the law of the land these days? Yes, but I'm talking about in the world in general. We see more of people trying to get away from following the law. I'm excused from the law. We have more people that going right here where it says the respect of the laws of the land and their loyalty to high ideals. Do you see people today having high ideals in life in general? I know teaching in a college, I see that going down and down. Respect is going down for down. If you don't like anybody in our world today, what do you do to them? You just shoot them. And based on the statements that I had before that, it's just a problem. We're getting away from having the funeral services and getting away from the importance of it. And so I truly think that what I see as a funeral director, that this statement is really true. And so you have a society where they treat, when you've buried people, did you have funerals and people came? You maybe had a meal or something afterwards. And were times different during those times? People have more respect for one another. So that I love that saying. So And first of all, I'm going to let you know, I'm the program director of the funeral service, as Liz said. I'm not here promoting a funeral home, okay? So you're not going to get any advertisements from me, about that. I'm here to give you information and to answer any questions you might have. And so just wanted to say that real quick. Now, funerals and care for the bodies have gone on since the beginning of time. Even in the book of Genesis in the Bible, it says, "Then Jesus directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days for what was the time required for the embalming. And then they mourned them for 70 days. What if it took 40 days today and we mourn for 70 days? Well, could we handle it? It'd be really, really hard. And then if we go and look at the Egyptian period, their embalming period was a 70-day period. And can anybody tell me why they wanted to preserve the body back in the Egyptians days? The mummies that they still find. There was a belief that when a person dies, the soul went to the sun and back, and it took 3,000 years to do that, and so the body needed to be preserved so that the body was there when the soul returned from that trip to the sun and back. And that was called the circle of necessity. All right? Prior to the Civil War, there wasn't a lot of embalming going on, but with the Civil War, people were actually dying in the fields, as you would imagine, and so they were just laying them to rest wherever they died. And they have a huge Civil War cemetery in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I enjoyed going out there and just looking at the markers and where the people were from. And they even have a camel that, did you know that they took camels back during those times to carry their loads? Camels. And one of their camels died, and it's actually buried out there in that cemetery. But people need to have closure, and I'm going to talk a lot about closure. But there was a need for the dead to be transferred back to where they came from. So this picture, if you ever look up Civil War embalming, you're going to see this picture over here with this gentleman. Let's see here. Did I do it too fast? There he is. And this gentleman is named Richard Burr. He's actually was known as the Civil War embalmer. And he would embalm the bodies and send them back to the families. Back then, they embalmed with alcohol, arsenic, and some other things. But they quit using alcohol and the other, I forget what the other chemicals are, but you know why? Well, even better than that. You could kill somebody with arsenic. Nobody would know it when they go to do an investigation because they were embalmed with arsenic. So that was one of those things. And so that is when embalming actually started taking hold in America because of the Civil War. Now, the post-Civil War, we started seeing funerals, embalming and preservation for funerals. And back on February 20, 1962, Abraham Lincoln had a son named Willie that was actually, he got sick and he passed away. And they were going to bury him in Springfield, Illinois. But the president couldn't handle his son being separated from him, so he had him buried in a mausoleum in Washington. Well, a few years later, on April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And so the embalmer was Henry Cattell. And Henry Cantell actually embalmed Willie, and he saw what great job he did, and so Henry Cantell embalmed Abraham Lincoln. Well, you heard about the funeral train? So they take the body of the president and going to take him back to Springfield, Illinois, where he was going to be buried. And it took 3 weeks for that train to make its rounds. Do you think they had ice and stuff on there that keeps it refrigerated? No. And it was 1,700 miles. They embalmed, Henry Cantell embalmed President Lincoln so well that, and on this train he even took the body of his son, Willie, to be buried in Springfield, Illinois at the Forest Lawn Cemetery. If you ever get a chance, or tell people to go by there, it's very interesting. His body was tried to be stolen several times, and so finally now they buried him in a block of concrete that's 10 feet deep. But before they put him in there, his body remained just like it did back from 1865. And this is a picture, I know it's hard to see, but this is actually Abraham Lincoln lying in state in his casket. They said that the clothing that he was wearing and the gloves that he had already rotted. And so Henry Cantell did a very good job. And so people were seeing that, we didn't have to go bury somebody the same day. We through embalming, we could have a day or 2 or 3, or in some cultures, a week or so. And so this is when the preservation part started taking hold for funeral purposes. And so what do you think the purposes of the funeral are today? And this is a feedback in time. Don't say closure. Somebody said closure. What else? Allow a place for mourning. Mm-hmm. Any others? Well, there is a guy named Wolfelt, and he comes up with these reasons for a funeral. The first one is, like someone said, closure. Reality that the death has occurred. Because there's a lot of people that actually think about 9/11. How many people are still missing from the buildings? Those families actually still probably think, well, one day they're going to call, one day they're going to walk through the door. Even though they may know they're dead, they never had closure, and so they don't really, they know it, but really don't want to believe it. The next thing is to be able to recall memories about the person that passed away. So it allows it's like a social function where people will come to bring support to the family and to memorialize the deceased. Also, the next thing that does is brings up support. Just think if you were by yourself and someone died and you had no one to come visit you. There would be a lack of support, and you would have a harder time, don't you think, handling it if you didn't have support? And then it allows a time for us to express our feelings. It's a safe place. We always heard the old adage, real men don't cry. Well, but it provides a safe place for those that normally, whether it's men or women, teenagers or whatever, allows them the safe place to be able to cry, and then that funeral service brings about the meaning of the whole time, whether it's the person, it shows that you meaning from the support, and then finally integration is where a person can finally start getting back to life. I won't say back to normal, because if you lose someone, nothing ever gets back to normal, but you're able to adjust and be able to move on in your life. So those are the purpose of the funeral. Now, does anything of this say anything about the dead? No. So the purpose of the funeral is not for the deceased person, it's for the living. And sometimes you'll see it called a celebration of life. There we go. Okay, so a celebration of life. Let me ask you. You go to McDonald's, how many of you like Big Macs? None of you? Okay, well, let's try Burger King. How many of you like Whoppers? Or Chick-fil-A, their chicken sandwich? Okay, so, all right, let's go with Chick-fil-A and their chicken sandwich. Okay? So, you get a Chick-fil-A sandwich at Chick-fil-A. You might get their good waffle fries and their ice cream. If you haven't ever had that, it is delicious. It tastes as good as homemade, except last night I made a gallon of homemade peach ice cream. And so, now they have the peach milkshakes going on at Chick-fil-A right now. So then you decide to go today, and you go to McDonald's, and you buy a Chick-fil-A sandwich, waffle fries, and a peach milkshake. The next day you go down to 248 Diner and you buy a Chick-fil-A sandwich, the waffle fries, and a peach milkshake. Is that what you're going to find? Or are you going to find Chick-fil-A sandwiches at every restaurant or chain that you go to? No. So, but how many of you have been to a funeral where everything was the exact same thing? The only difference was the person in the casket. Down south, we always called it Baptist 1 or Baptist 2. What that meant was, if it's Baptist 1, we were only having one song. If it's Baptist 2, we were going to have two. And you had the prelude, then you had a scripture, a song, and the message, and you left. Baptist 2, you came in, you started out with a song, you'd have an obituary, eulogy, then another song, and then the funeral message, and then you left. Every funeral was the exact same. The only difference was the family that was sitting in the chapel and the deceased person. They were called cookie cutter funerals. And, we don't like to see change, do we? Because we get used to something. And we're seeing more that the funerals are being more individualized rather than cookie cutter. Because back then, you could go to a cookie cutter funeral. It didn't matter if you went to this funeral home or this funeral home. All of them were the same. And so that is kind of where we're going today with the personalization and being able to plan your own funeral. So here's our trends for today. All right, being buried. Okay, that's pretty common, right? Being buried, you can be buried in the ground. You can be buried at sea. Another thing is entombment. Entombment is when someone has a mausoleum and the body is placed into the mausoleum. Cremation. Y'all heard of cremation? Okay. Have you ever heard of alkaline hydrolysis? All right, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Body composting. Have you ever heard of body composting? Body donation. What about green burials? Okay, so let's talk about briefly about each one of these. I think ground and sea burial and entombment are pretty common. Cremation is now pretty common. Alkaline hydrolysis, people say, I don't want to be cremated because I don't want my body to burn. Well, this new alkaline hydrolysis, and I think I've got a slide on each one, so let me go back. I'll get to it in a minute, but I'll tell you what, let's go in order. So the purposes of embalming are three things. First is disinfection of the body. And I'm not going to go into the whole biological reasons of how our body starts decomposing. I will just say that the bacteria that we need to live, once it's and our blood's circulating, it keeps it in our guts. But then once we die, the gates are open and they can travel all over the body, and they like to live off dead things. And so that's what causes the decomposition. If someone dies from a certain disease, you want to be able to see that person. Well, embalming will kill just about any disease that you may have in your body. Also, that protects the safety of individuals. And because, did you know that embalmers can get pneumonia? They can get the flu, now COVID, since that's in the mix, from embalming a body. But once that's done, that virus or whatever is not living in the body anymore. And the second thing is temporary preservation. We're not trying to preserve a body so that it lasts 3,000 years, or in the case of Abraham Lincoln, to last this long. Our main thing is making sure the body is preserved until we can actually bury them, cremate them, or whatever choice of disposition you chose. And then this is the one, that restoration. How many of you went and have been to a funeral and you've seen the person and people say, oh, she looks just like she did the day I married her. Or they look so much younger. You know what does that? It's not makeup. The foundation of it is embalming. Because embalming actually, our bodies are nothing but proteins, but the embalming actually causes those to cross-link and create a barrier that prevents the bacteria from being able to eat. And so that preserves the body. And it also causes the firming. I've had people that I've embalmed. When I started and when I finished, I was like, somebody got up and moved and came and lay back down because it didn't look like the same person. And that was because of the embalming. So now, let's look at break these things down. Cremation. Pennsylvania requires that the crematory be 1,800 degrees. And it has to stay at 1,800 degrees. Depending on the equipment, a body can be cremated within an hour and a half, 2 hours. Some machines take up to 4 or 5. So, but you have options with cremation. You can keep the cremated remains, unless you're certain religions. Now, like with Catholics, you have to bury those cremains. You cannot, and I like to call them not ashes, but cremated remains, because they are your loved one's remains that's been cremated. Ashes sounds like something that you hate to dust out of the fireplace, okay? So cremated remains is the term that I like to use. You can actually scatter them in fireworks. You can have built fireworks, and they go up, and when they go out, it can spread the cremated remains. People have scattered them in space, taken them up, and then they're released into space. Another thing is, I was talking to Miss Whitemane when she came in, and she was talking about how you can make bullets out of it. So, you can put them in a bullet shot. If you make your own bullets, you can put cremated remains in there and shoot the gun, and then it's going to scatter instead of bullets, little metal things in, it's going to have the cremated remains, and then it just spreads them out that way. You can spread them over the person's favorite mountain, or if they had a lake or somewhere like that. You can do that, but make sure you follow the laws on doing that, all right? Look up here. What is this up here? That's a diamond ring. You can actually take a small amount of your loved one's cremains. You can send it to this company, and they will actually, because diamonds are created by heat, pressure, and carbon, and they can imitate that that it takes in nature, but they can do it in a shorter period of time. And so you can actually have your loved one made into diamonds. Anybody know that? Heard about it? Oh, that's a pretty ring. Where'd you get it? Oh, that's Mama. So there's so many things that you can do, options with cremation. All right. So then the alkaline hydrolysis. What this process is, it has a chamber. You place the deceased body inside of the chamber. You add a certain amount of water, and then it's pressured, and they have a chemical that they put in there. Most of the time it's lye. And what lye will do with that pressured steam and lye, it will actually cause your body to decompose exactly how it does in the ground, or decompose. And it usually takes about a 2-hour process. It's about 80% less gas that it takes, because you only have to heat it up to 300 and something. And somebody said, well, I don't want my body to be boiled. But it's not boiling the body. It's actually with the pressure and the steam and the lye that the body is broken down into normal compounds, sugars, carbohydrates, all of those different things. And they say that it's sterile, that you could actually pour this down your kitchen sink, that it's that safe. So some other words you may hear it called: water cremation or aquamation. And with the difference between cremation and aquamation, the cremated remains you get for cremation are bone fragments of the larger bones. With aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis, none of the bones are decomposed. They actually put them in a machine that will actually grind them down to the cremated remains that we actually get. Or in this case, aquamation remains, because it's not being cremated. Okay, so body composting. I don't know if you can see this picture up here at the top. Well, but it looks like a bunch of honeycombs. You see that? Here's a closer up version of it. This started in Washington and Oregon, out that area, a couple of years ago. So body composting is where you actually place your loved one in, see this little container here? They add some peat moss and other things that help you to decompose naturally. And you're placed in that cell there, and you're left. So it's the human composting process takes between 6 and 10 weeks. Each body spends 30 days in a recomposed vessel, which is this. Then the soil is transferred to a bin to cure and dry for an additional 2 to 6 weeks. So we're looking about 16 weeks. They can decompose your body. You can go pick up your loved one, and they are like dirt. And you can use that in your garden. You can, do whatever you want to. So we're seeing some far out things here now, aren't we? That are done. Green burials. Now, green burials are done. There are some cemeteries that have green sections, which means there's no markers. You just have a place that you're buried. You're not embalmed. The casket, either they put you in a casket or they may just put you in a sheet. You can actually be buried in the ground. And now it's not the cheaper version, because those expenses you get with opening a grave at a cemetery, they're all going to be the same price, whether it's Green Cemetery or others. Now, there's some places that actually have woods that you find a certain spot, pick it out, and you can bury your loved one there. And you cannot have any art, you can't go and buy a tombstone or anything like that and put there, because that's not normally found in nature. But you could find a rock and engrave the information on there and place it. But it's just done in nature. Everything's all natural. Let nature take its course. So that brings us up to you, and what do you think about the funeral? What do you think about what you want? Okay? Well, personalization is very, very dominant today. Can anybody tell me, when I say personalization to a funeral, can anybody give me an example or tell me what might be an example of personalization? Okay, the songs that you sing, yes, being your favorites. Exactly. Grandma quilted all the time, and so instead of putting flowers on your casket, you can actually put one of her quilts that she made. I had a funeral one time where the person was a big gardener. And so instead of just flowers on the casket piece, they had like vegetables and things in there. Had one that he was employed by the funeral home I worked for at the time in Mississippi, and he was one of the main grass cutters at the cemetery. So we had his lawnmower sitting at the front door of the funeral home as he was coming in. Not he wasn't coming in, but as other people came in, There was one time where the person was a big horse rider, and instead of putting the casket on the platform that we put the casket on, which is called either a bier or church trucks, we had the casket sitting on bales of hay. And they even had his saddle right there. And people have even brought in their, I've read, bring in like horses or whatever their pets were to let them actually see the body as well. And even though the person was dead, it was amazing how they reacted to seeing their owners. Up here, you can see in the head of this casket, this is a half-couch casket, but there is a personalization was made that had a flag and then had a picture of the deceased person. He was in his military uniform. Then you probably read these things in the news and says, oh, that's not true. That can't be true. But yes, this person right here, he is embalmed. He is sitting on his motorcycle because he loved his motorcycle. And then they buried him in this glass encased vessel. There was one that was widely shown where a man loved football, and he had a particular team that he loved to watch. So instead of having him in a casket, they had him laid down in his recliner. He had the remote in one hand and a beer in the other, and they had the TV going with his favorite team playing ball. Okay? So any personalization you want to do, you can do it, okay? So, one thing you've heard of pre-arrangements or pre-planning. One thing is that this helps the family that is left to be able to mourn and not have to worry about it. But can you tell me the difference between pre-planning and pre-arrangements?
You can pre-plan, but you don't necessarily have to make the arrangements. Is that the difference?
Yeah, you can pre-plan the funeral, but you don't pay for it.
Right.
Okay, pre-arrangements, you make the funeral plans and you pay for it. You lock it in at today's prices. Where we get in trouble is people go to the funeral home and they pre-plan and they tell the family, well, I went to the funeral home today and I made my funeral arrangements. And when that person dies, the family that's left think that it was already paid for. And it wasn't. And so then that causes a big upheaval because where we're going to get the money to do what Dad wanted to be done at his funeral. You get to pick out your specific songs, scriptures, poems. You can have put down who you want to do your funeral. If you have a specific minister. And so you're putting your wishes on paper, and the funeral home keeps those. Because you may tell them to family members, and you die 20, 30 years, they may not even remember any of that. But, and then your final expenses are paid. How many of you bought house insurance when you had a house or you have a house? Why did you buy house insurance? Yeah, just in case your house catches on fire or floods. But how many people have paid all their lives on house insurance and never had a fire? How many of you had insurance on your car? And you do that in case you have an accident, right? How many of you have driven all your life and paid car insurance and never used it? We prepare for those things. But you know one thing, as I said first, everybody's going to die, but we don't prepare for that. And it leaves people in sometimes serious trouble because they don't have any money. Now, if you buy a bag of apples and you have, and I think I have a picture of that. Look, I got some apples. That one is the only one that's bad. Are you going to just take the rest of the apples and just throw them away because you had one bad one? But that's what we do as humans, is when we hear of a funeral home storing bodies for months, years, and not embalming them and not burying them, or just giving people cat litter instead of the cremated remains, that's a bad apple. But everybody has a tendency to throw every funeral home in that category. Okay? So usually the ones that are doing it are the ones that would be corrupt no matter what they were doing. So try not to put funeral homes as all funeral homes are bad just because you hear of one on the news. And another thing is, when you make these prearrangements, people say, "Oh, I'm not going to worry about it." But my grandfather died in 1984. And when he died, that's what got me interested in funeral service. I actually went to school, got a degree in music, a master's in music, a master's in education, was in church music work for over 25 years full time, and I felt like it was a time of change. And I always said that if I wasn't doing that, that funeral service is what I would do. So about 2004, I hit that point, and so I quit my full-time job, went to school, had no job, but you know, things work out, and so I was able to get a job, got my degree, and worked in funeral homes, and then I started teaching, and I was even in a funeral home when I was a freshman in college. I lived at the funeral home, and y'all probably have known people that had funeral homes that lived upstairs. So that's where I lived when I was in college, was at the funeral home. And so as we start to wrap this up, I was telling you about my grandfather. My mom and dad knew that if something were to happen to my grandfather and my grandmother, that even though my mom had 2 siblings, they knew that they were probably going to be the one responsible for the funeral expenses. So he died 2 years after them taking out that prearrangement. His funeral cost $2,500 or $2,700. And I'll use $2,500 because it's easier to add 5s rather than 7s and all those kind of things. My grandmother died 2006. So was that 20, 30 something years later? She got the funeral that she paid for. You know how much it cost? $2,500. You know what it was if she hadn't have done that, how much it would have cost then? About 4. But that same funeral that my grandfather had back in 1984, even today, would only be about $10,000 to $12,000. How many things, you know, when people say prices of funerals are going up and they're just taking advantage of people, I can tell you, most funeral homes are not taking advantage of people. They charge what they have because they have to stay in business. But there's this mentality that we have someone that passes away, we expect funeral homes to provide free services. Now, if they gave free services to everybody, would they be able to stay in business? No, because you have to do that. Everybody thinks that funeral directors ride fancy cars and just open doors and close doors. But you know how much an average funeral director pay is starting out? Take a guess. $50,000 a year, okay? What about hourly? What do you think? Because some are salary and some work hourly. Yeah. What if I told you $15 an hour? $15 an hour is where they start out. And most of them never get up to 50 or 60. But we have this mentality, or not mentality, but this idea that the funeral directors are really, you know, it's the owners that make the money, you know, when there's the profit after personnel and all that. Now, all of that to say is kind of banish that idea of what the funeral home does and realize that they're there to serve you and make your plans according to how you want to take them. So the information that I'd like to give to you today is to sit and discuss with your loved ones what you want. And then also think about making your prearrangements so that your wishes are carried out and you don't leave your family in a financial struggle. Make sure that they know your wishes, the funeral home knows your wishes, and decide what you're going to do. You know, are you going to be buried? Are you going to be cremated or acclimated or a green burial, any of these things? These are all options. Now, one thing that I want to say about cremation, 90% of the people that want to be cremated, they think that you can't have a visitation with a viewing and a funeral. Anybody think the same way? You can have a cremation, but you do all of the same things that you would do for a regular service. And you can have viewings, and because remember, one thing is you're going to remember the last thing that you see of that person. It's called a lasting memory picture. Now, you'll remember other things in their lives, but think about somebody that's died. What is one of the first visions that come into your head? Is it them lying in the casket? Like I said, my grandfather died in 1984, and in my mind's eye, I can see exactly what he looks like. And so, looking ahead, choosing, 90% don't know that you can have a cremation, and you still save money because you don't have to buy cemetery plots, you don't have to buy a vault, you don't have to buy or pay for opening and closing of the grave or the tombstone. And instead of going to the cemetery, the individual is cremated after the service. And I have people tell me, oh, just throw me in a pine box. Well, first of all, let me tell you, pine boxes are more expensive than some of the other wood caskets. And I know they're talking about just a plain box. But remember, it's not about you, the deceased, at that time. It's about the family. And people will have a lasting memory picture. If they were in the hospital hooked up to a bunch of IV tubes or really suffering, that's going to be the memory picture you have. Or would you rather see someone laying in a casket that is dressed, they're at peace, they're not suffering anymore, and have that type of impression? So, any specific questions? Yes?
If you were to make a today, what the service is at that time, and then you decide whether you're going to get a retirement,
Right.
what happens? Is the money put in a trust? How does that?
Yes, it's either in Pennsylvania, it has to be put in a trust or into an insurance policy. And so, for it to grow money. So those are transferable. Now it's whether the funeral home in Arizona will give you full credit for everything. They should give you what it's worth, and they would only have to pay the difference, Because if we paid $12,000 for a funeral here and go to California and that one's $40,000 and it's the exact same thing, I doubt they're going to accept that. But you do have at least that much, and you still have your wishes that you want to be carried out.
What you originally paid plus whatever growth there is.
Right. Exactly.
Doesn't mean that it's carte blanche paid fully.
Right.
It would be if you stay in Nazareth,
Right.
the same home, theoretically they should honor.
They will. Yeah. If you buy a prearrangement or pre-play your funeral, whatever you paid for it at that funeral home, they will, and they're by law, they have to honor that. Now, if you go to another funeral home in Nazareth, they'll probably accept that as well, because they'd rather you go to their funeral home than the other funeral home. So is that? Well, no, they're not obligated, but from a business perspective, they're going to do it. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Then again, it depends on your religious affiliation,
Exactly.
because cremation calls for burial in holy ground.
Exactly. Yes.
Which means you do have to buy the land in which that body will be interred.
Right, and usually it's a Catholic cemetery or whatever the denomination's cemetery is.
That's
Yeah.
another whole story. Because that's another list of rules that
Exactly.
have to be taken into consideration and dispels a lot of these other.
Right. You're exactly right. Uh, and I think, are you, do you mind if I ask if you're Catholic? Or what's your denomination?
I am a Catholic.
Catholic, okay? Because Catholics did not allow cremation at all because the body had to be present for the funeral mass.
So yet, let me tell you, I experienced this when my husband died. I knew that he wanted to be in church.
Right.
For final rites, et cetera, and of course the church allows that. So it altered the service itself because we had to take him in the casket into the church.
Right.
We had the whole mass burial. And then because he was going to be cremated, we had to go in more, had to do the gun salute. He was a military.
Right.
So the gun salute had to be done right outside of church. They could not easily take him to the cemetery, bring him back. It was a logistics problem.
Right.
So we had to agree to the altering of all the logistics
Right.
to make it work properly.
Yes.
But he got everything that the family thought would please him and would please us.
Right.
And in the end, his remains had to be interred.
Exactly.
Which left me, his wife, with not too much choice, because if I want to be where he is, I should really think of being done the same.
Exactly. Right. And that kind of goes along with what I was saying, that you can be cremated after the service rather than before. Because if you're cremated, if your body is cremated, there's only one person that's going to actually view that body, and it's someone that knows that person, and their only sole purpose is to identify, saying yes, so that the body is not, it's the right body that's being cremated.
Or you must trust the funeral director, who you are entrusting the body to.
Exactly.
Follow through on what they're pledging to do for you.
You're exactly
Because
right.
I was at that point where I said, no, wait, I'd like to go make sure this is, and
Right.
they were very good about it. They got the psychology of what I was living,
Right.
and they said, we promise, we will. And then it comes to a question of trust,
Right.
and all worked out well. Happy ending for me.
That's great. Yeah. That's a good story and testimony. Sure is.
So there's a lot that goes into all this, there's who you're dealing with that you really trust.
Right.
And then you have to consider the person that's deceased and what they would have wanted if you hadn't made final commitments. This is the way
Right.
you want it to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
And once you choose that direction, the spouse that's surviving has a choice. I know I want to be where he is.
Right.
There goes my choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have another question right behind you there.
Yes, sir.
I often wondered with regard to funeral home advertising, what's the difference between a director and a supervisor?
Okay. In Pennsylvania, anybody that has a license is considered a funeral director, but the state requires every funeral home to have a supervisor. So like the manager, if you will. And so it's one of the funeral directors that actually works at that home that is the supervisor or manager. But the state law requires it to call it supervisor. Yeah. Good question.
Do we have any more questions? One from Mrs. Markaby.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, my husband prepaid for both of us way back.
Mm-hmm.
But yet when he passed away, one, the people who picked him up, I never even heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And two, we got charged over and above what we had already paid. And we were supposed to, pay for the whole thing.
Right.
I was wondering, what went wrong?
Was it the same owners?
We signed a
And I'm not asking for the funeral home name, I'm just asking that.
Yeah, no, we signed with the Northampton Memorial Shrine.
Okay, all right.
The people who they had, you know, to come up and get the body to cremate, I never even heard of it.
Okay,
And yet they were sending us bills. And yet we were supposed to pay for it, you know, and it was years, so they had, as you said, it's supposed to be put in escrow and building account. I mean, we still had to pay several $1,000.
so you didn't go through a funeral home, you just went through the shrine?
Up there, and, you know, I since learned, and I never heard of this funeral home that came to pick him up.
Right.
I have no idea.
And sometimes there are several mortuary services or transporters that funeral homes will use because funeral homes, I don't know if you realize, I have 8 or 9 calls a day looking for a student that's graduating or someone that's looking to make a move. There's a shortage of funeral directors. Down in York County area, I know of about 60 positions open in that area. And so and I do embalm for one funeral home. I just do their embalming. I don't do funerals with them or anything like that. But they use a transport service. That's what their company is. They go to hospitals, homes, or wherever to make the removals. And so they may not have been, but if you went through the shrine instead of the funeral homes, I'm not sure how that works because they are actually not under the state funeral director boards. Cemeteries like that, they're under the real estate board. So, you know, without seeing the contract or stuff like that, it could have changed hands or something, and because there are greedy people, and so I wished I had a better answer for you on that. But yeah.
Okay, do we have any further questions? I know it's certainly given me some food for thought. I'm sure it has for all of you also. I know that I always had my plan that I would probably think about rearranging and pre-planning, and now I'm thinking, maybe not so much. I'm not sure now, because I don't know if I'll always be here. I thought when you did it that when you went to a different state or a different, in a different part of the state, that your pre-planning arrangement went with you in its entirety. I didn't realize you still had the possibility that it might not be accepted somewhere else. So now I've got to do some research.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the key. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you, Tony. It's always a pleasure to see you, and we appreciate you spending your time with us today.
And it was good to see all of you. And I'll give Liz my contact information, or she has it. And if you have any questions, feel free to call my office. Because I'm usually there every day, not in the summertime so much, but once school starts, since I'm an administrator, I have a lot of extra time. I don't have to teach 4 or 5 classes, so I'm available. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask Liz, and you can call me.
I can certainly get that to them.
Yep.
Alrighty, so thank you very much, everyone, for coming out, and a big hand for Tony Moore. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hang around if anybody has questions, specific questions.
Maybe you'll see some of us again.
Maybe.
I'm Jewish.
Hey, so you have to be buried within 24 hours.
Right.
No embalming.
No embalming, all that
Right.
stuff. Are there Jewish funeral homes in